Hi folks, it's Matt here from the RCR podcast. Before we get stuck into today's podcast, I'd just like to ask you a favour. If you've ever got any value from this podcast, you could do us a massive favour by going to wherever you get your podcasts from and subscribing to the show and leaving us a review. You can also follow us on Instagram at go-rover, and that would be fantastic. So let's jump right into today's. So folks, today I am super excited because I've got somebody with me today who I have known for quite a number of years. I met through the Inverness Chamber of Commerce many years ago, and that is Hannah Lloyd. Now, Hannah Lloyd is currently a business development manager with Scottish Land and Estates, so I thought I'd get her in for a bit of a chat, have a talk through her career to date, where she's up to, and then we can find a little bit more about Scottish Land and Estates, what they're up to, and how things are going. So, Hannah, welcome to my little box in Inverness. Is it good to be back up here in the Highlands in the sunshine?
Oh, it's brilliant. Great sunshine. It's a gorgeous blue sky day, and just really nice to be back connecting with people who have not seen for, well, since pre-COVID face-to-face, apart from up a hill.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I should just point out for the listeners, we did bump into each other up Fireish, wasn't it? Yeah. I think that was, last summer?
I think so.
Something like that, wasn't it? Yeah.
One of my favourite walks in Inverness. If nobody's done that, get climbing
It's
Fireish.
Fantastic, isn't it? It's fantastic. Yeah. I managed to get my youngest son, James, up there a little while ago. It's the first hill that he'd actually walked up properly, and he was absolutely chuffed when he got to the top. However, it cost me probably about £7.50 in dairy milk to get him up there. It's just like having a puppy. I just keep feeding him chocolate as he was coming up the hill.
A small price to pay. One of my favourite memories in the Highlands, actually, when I lived up here, was not long before I left, I climbed Fireish in the snow for sunrise. So I set off from the car park, head torch on, and had a cup of tea and breakfast at the top, which was just, as the sun came up behind Fireish, absolutely incredible. That was, absolutely beautiful day.
Well, I keep thinking about going up there with the drone, but we're always up, it's family time, isn't it? So I'm either up there with my other half, Katrina, or with James, or with the dog, or on a sneaky walk, and you're like, can I be bothered carrying a drone right the way up there? But I've always think flying through the arch. So we're nattering on about Fireish. These people are going to have to go and Google this now. Fyrish. Yeah, monument. It's up above the hill, above a little Highland town called Ness, which is mostly famous for the world's strongest man, Tom Stoltman, and his brother Luke. So yeah, there we go.
There we go.
So I'm now going to dive right back into your past. You're looking at my notes like I've got some sort of history book here. It's really not. Do you know where I stole this from? So I went onto LinkedIn and I stole this from an article that you'd given to somebody in a magazine, and obviously I know some of it, but it's always good when you start to do a bit of deep diving into people's backgrounds just to see what it is. So where do you originate from? Because I'm picking up the Scottish accent there. So
London born.
Yeah.
Then moved to the Lake District and arrived in Scotland age 8. I'm 30 next week, so it feels like a long time ago. And,
no, now we're going to have to send you a birthday card.
It's on Tuesday. Then grew up in Edinburgh, really. Went to school in Edinburgh, left school, went to South Africa.
Wow.
For a year, and then went to university in Aberdeen before going back to Edinburgh.
What did you study in Aberdeen?
Management and real estate, but not in a straightforward fashion. No. So I left school and my place at uni was to do primary education.
Right.
I wouldn't be sat here if I was if I had pursued primary education, but I went to South Africa and ran a school in a children's home and promptly realised that teaching wasn't for me. Came back, started at Aberdeen doing teaching, and confirmed it really wasn't for me. And so I left and went back the following year to do business management. And then, as is so often the case in life, somebody nudged me to take the real estate modules.
Yeah.
And the rest is history. I end up doing management and graduating with management and real estate, which is then how we end up in the next bit of the
yeah. So
story.
what happened? So how was that course? Was it a good experience?
Yes, I think I struggled at school and at uni with my own self-confidence and my own inner belief. And I've only really recently started to talk about this because I've realised that it's valuable to kind of share that vulnerability, particularly with people who are maybe 18, 19 at the moment, and maybe struggling with that part of their life. And I was like, oh, I'm not very good. And it probably took me until I was in 4th year to really believe in my own ability. And therefore, because I didn't believe in my own ability, I didn't work as hard as I could have done at uni. I found lots of it really difficult. I mean, as a management and real estate degree, you have to do modules in things like statistics and economics, which all just go like so far over my head. And I'm not a numbers.
No.
I'm not a natural number cruncher, unlike my dad, who's an accountant. It doesn't come naturally to me. And so I did find it quite difficult. But actually, ultimately, in my 4th year, I kind of clicked with a lecturer, and I tried to contact her the other week. Actually, I can't get hold of her, which is a real shame. But I really clicked with her, and she really believed in my ability, and she supported me. She wasn't my advisor, but she supported me through writing my dissertation, and I went on to get the best mark in my class for my dissertation.
Fantastic. I mean, it's amazing how we self-sabotage ourselves as well. Because I mean, I've been on a similar journey. I'm quite happy to put it out there. I realised about, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 years ago that I'd spent my whole life trying to basically impress my father and get his approval. But the reality is that, I don't know, would you call me an entrepreneur? I suppose so. Entrepreneur,
I would say so.
Businessman, running my own business with, you know, a number of staff is totally alien to him, who grew up just after the Second World War. He's always been employed by somebody. He's always been in that kind of regimented system. So it can be a real challenge. And for, you know, I doubt there's any teenagers listening to this, but we'll put it out there anyway. You know, the modern social media is telling you all the time that you're not pretty enough, you're not clever enough, you're not doing enough. Everybody else has got is having fantastic holidays and driving around in Ferraris, and the reality is that's not reality. Just to have that experience, to find somebody that can support you in that way. Yeah. And it's funny, my lead consultant Peter was in for one of these interviews a little while ago, and he was saying the same, that somebody spotted something within him and managed to pull that out. So that's fantastic.
I think always along the way there's people who nudge you, and at the time it's maybe unconscious in their actions, or you don't realise the significance of that. And if you look at nearly anybody's life story, you can find those people if you dig for them. And I know I've got others who probably come on to slightly later in my story who have done something similar.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. So you finish your degree, you go off into the world of work. Where did you go to next?
I actually initially went to work for a letting agent and festival accommodation provider in Edinburgh, who I had done some work for in summers at uni. I'd applied for kind of all the big name property consultancy firms that you'll all be familiar with, and all their grad schemes. And I'd been rejected. Kind of some I hadn't even heard back from, some I hadn't. Some I had a straight rejection from. Yeah. And that was tough. Rejection is always tough. But reflecting back, actually relatively quickly afterwards, probably 3-4 months after, I was like, I didn't get those jobs because I didn't want those jobs. And that for me was the reality. I actually didn't want to go on and be a surveyor, a land manager, any of those things that lots of my contemporaries on my course now are. That isn't what I wanted to do. And so I didn't get the job. And when you're in a highly competitive environment like that, working for these big names, your passion is going to come through or it's not going to come through. Yeah. So you're going to drop out pretty quickly if it doesn't come through. So I worked for them, for this letting agent and I was on a fixed contract till October or something. And then I started to kind of just look at, in the summer, what other opportunities are there? And then I discovered GLM through Facebook, completely randomly.
Really?
A family friend of ours used to work for GLM as well, and his wife shared that they were working on the Fife Arms project in Braemar, and I was like, that looks funky. That looks cool. Let's look at GLM and see who they are, what they are.
And who are they? What do they do?
Yeah, GLM are architects and building surveyors, basically specialising in historic buildings. And I, in my spare time, like to go and look at historic buildings and castles. So I was like, oh, hang on, this is quite cool. But hadn't quite worked out how I could fit into the team at GLM, because I was like, I still don't want to be a surveyor. Definitely don't want to be a surveyor. And then about 3 weeks later, the same family friend shared a marketing assistant position at GLM, which only comes up, I can say, about once every 5 years, because having just recently moved on, that job's become available again for someone else. But having, it doesn't come up very often, just really good timing. And I kind of looked at it and I was like, oh, hang on, they do something that I'm really passionate about. With buildings, I'm really passionate about. I've got a bit of experience in marketing, got a bit of experience in social media. Maybe I should do this job. And then I spent 4 weeks writing probably about 50 versions of my application.
Wow. You really wanted the job.
No, I went through a very massive roller coaster. My mum will vouch for this. I was living at home at the time, and we had a family friend staying as well who was also applying for jobs, and every night after dinner Mum made us sit down and draft our job applications. And every night I deleted it. Like, I'm never going to get the job, it's not worth it. I'm not good enough, I'm not right. I don't know how to work the Adobe suite, which is like one bullet point in 30, you know?
And that's only been put in there because whoever wrote the job description was like, and they've probably never done it before in their life and just making it up as they go along.
Yeah. And I was like, I'm never going to get this job. I'm not right. And I had seen the job the day it went live, and I applied the morning the application's closed. That's, that 4 weeks, I really was like, oh, there's no chance. And then I got a phone call. They were like, we'd like to invite you for an interview. And I was like, sorry, I think you've got the wrong person. It was like, full scale imposter, I don't believe in myself mode. But I had a phone interview with Suzanne, who did my job before me at GLM, and then I was invited for a formal interview with Ian. And I remember going to the interview, and my mum took me down onto Castle Street in Edinburgh, where GLM's offices were at the time, and she took me there, and Mum said, oh, I'll just wait for you. And I was like, okay, cool, I don't think I'll be very long. I was in there in the basement in their boardroom chatting to Ian and Suzanne for 2.5 hours.
Wow.
And I realised now, having built a very close relationship with Ian, that in that meeting room on that day, he saw something in me that I hadn't seen in myself yet. And he really believed that I was capable of doing the role within GLM, and that I had enough experience, enough willingness to learn, and enough vague knowledge of their sector that everything else was teachable. Yeah. And he's another person who probably, in the 5.5 years I worked for him, nudged me lots of times.
It's always about the people, and I've said that. I think we've employed 5 or 6 people over the last 18 months or so into the business, so quite a steep rate of growth, which has meant that I've had to get a lot better at interviewing people, and I'm not very good at it. And what I actually realised was that I want to employ people based on aligning with our own kind of values and where we want to see the business grow, because, as you say, probably 70% of almost every job is teachable, unless you're working in a heavily regulated industry where you've got to have a real suite of formal qualifications. And I'm not saying that the formal qualifications aren't important. They absolutely are, as the foundation, as the building stone. But for people to be a good fit within a business, that doesn't come along that often, and it's just far more important than anything else, really, I feel. So
absolutely. And I think what I have realised is that I could learn, if I could have gone in there with no marketing knowledge, with no kind of building knowledge even, and applied common sense, but actually what mattered was that I could get on with Ian, and that Ian could see that I was going to work well with him. And over the years, over my time at GLM when I joined was 1 office in Edinburgh. When I left, it was 3 offices.
I think you're selling yourself massively short, Hannah, because I stumbled across you when you moved up to the Highlands with GLM, which we'll come on to in a moment. But you're an absolute tour de force. You're everywhere, and we'll come on to that in a little bit. But yeah, I think you're massively underselling yourself there, which we all tend to do. It's a British thing as well, isn't it? We don't like to blow our own trumpets, but yeah. I think it's been an incredible journey. Yeah. So with GLM, how did you manage to end up from Edinburgh in Inverness? Because some people, we're a nationwide company, but when we say on the phone to people that we're based in Inverness, they think that we're in the Outer Hebrides. It's ridiculous.
Oh, I mean, Inverness is the Outer Hebrides, isn't it? You don't have Wi-Fi or anything. Come on, we all know that. How did I go from that? Well, I joined as marketing assistant, and I sat behind my desk in the office in Edinburgh. I managed everyone else's marketing activity. I managed our social media. I did loads of prepping of images and presentations for other people to present. I was very much desk based. I started to get involved in women in property about a year into my time at GLM. Which started to give me a bit of confidence in networking and around people, but that wasn't my space. I was like, don't know about this. And then I started to look a bit more broadly at GLM's marketing strategy on who we were, where we wanted to be, and the work we wanted to do. And in the time I'd been at GLM, I'd heard lots of people talk about growth, wanting to be something bigger. And I was like, well, this is a marketing thing, but I don't think being bigger means being physically more people in Edinburgh. I think it means something different. And I started to think about it, and then I got this opportunity to go to actually a Scottish Land and Estates event at Gordon Castle with Ian, and we drove up from Edinburgh for the day. So, Edinburgh to Elgin is a few hours in the car, and you're having a long conversation, you're driving through Speyside, and Ian made almost a flippant comment of how do we get more work here? And I was like, just turned to him and was like, we be here. And he looked at me like, oh no. Here comes a crazy idea.
With an massive expense attached to it, probably as most business owners tend to do.
And he was like, oh, none of the directors are in a position to move. And there was no planning of this really in my head, but I was like, why does it need to be a director? I would go. And over the course of that journey, we developed up a lot of the idea. We went on to do research. We looked at whether it should be in Inverness, whether it should be in Oban, or anywhere. Should it actually only be as far north as Perth, or should we come the next hour, the next 2 hours up the road? Was it the city a good place to be? And then that summer we got an opportunity from an Inverness-based business who we know well to take space in their office, and it really was like everything was falling into place. And Ian was like, oh, hang on, we can take this space. It's quite low risk because the rent was office rent in Inverness, but it's quite low risk because we're in the building with people that we know, and there's not that many spaces in Inverness where you can take a small office. I mean, we're sat in one, but there's not that many this.
It's a challenge.
And
it's a real challenge.
Real challenge up here. So everything kind of fell into place. The GLM board were supportive and behind it, and I was like, yeah, okay, let's do this. We found a flat that the company rented, and I was like, right, okay, pack some bags, let's go. And that's how I ended up in Inverness.
That's quite the story. and also that is that's a massive tick on the CV for your ability to persuade people to act in a certain way, isn't it? You managed to convince one of the board of directors of GLM in 2.5 hours to open an office in Inverness, authorise your move, and away you went. So that's pretty impressive. That's pretty impressive. Once you got up to the Highlands, what did the role within GLM involve then? Once I
everything. Once I got up to the Highlands, I really started to question why I suggested it in the first place. I was still doing my kind of day job, my organising other people, social media, keeping everyone's marketing going, kind of having a view over everything. But I also went from being a marketing assistant to being a marketing manager and having a much bigger responsibility for business development than I'd ever had before. And I think the article you referred to at the beginning is one I wrote for Executive Magazine, in which I recall the first event I went to on my own. And I remember it like it was yesterday. It was awful. I'd been at an event with colleagues in Perth, and I drove back up the road, and it was a Highland Businesswomen event, and it was at Bogbane Farm. And I arrived, and it was dark, and it was raining, and I couldn't find the door to Bogbane. I'd also driven up. I mean, real challenge, right? I'd also driven up from Perth the whole time, feeling sick and being like, I'm so nervous. Why am I going to this event? Nobody's going to speak to me. I'm going to be sat there on my own. It's going to be horrific. And I was like, okay, I can't do this. Can't do this. And then I was like, okay, just park the car. Go in. You've got to do this. This is the start of the next year, 2 years, whatever. And I remember like getting out the car, locking the car, taking a deep breath and just saying, fake it till you make it.
Absolutely.
And walking to the wrong side of Bogbane and then to the right side to go in through the door, and then recognising a couple of faces, and then the Highlands is a small place, and so recognised a couple of faces, and then soon was, you go Highland Businesswomen events, there's usually a dinner, so you're invited, and I was invited to sit next to somebody, and then you're in a group of
just having a chat,
5 or 6, and you're having a chat, and it's all fine. And then from there on, the Highlands is a nice place to have done this because it's small enough that nearly every event there was at least one other person.
Absolutely.
Do you know who? And you will know this yourself, Matt, that there are, there's always going to be somebody and my remit from Ian had been to become the most connected person in the Highlands. In my head, my remit was to make myself a little bit famous, and I think I succeeded.
You smashed that ball out of the park. Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I think for a while I found it really disconcerting that I would go to stuff and people, I'd introduce myself to somebody who I knew 100% I'd never met before, and they'd be like, oh yeah, I know who you are. I've heard loads about you. And I'd be like, don't know if I like that. But actually, now I'm like, best thing ever, because it really, I found a group particularly in Highland Businesswomen, who marketed for me. They extended my voice in the Highlands in the rooms that I wasn't in, and because I was nearly everywhere but not quite everywhere, and so it was really good to have those advocates.
And you ended up in a fairly senior position in that organisation, didn't you?
Yeah, so I think one of the big things for me about GLM and the way we were growing was that I didn't want us to just be a taker in the market. And the Highlands doesn't really like just a taker in the business market. So I wanted to find ways for us to give back. And whether that was with my time or with others in the organisation, giving back was a really key part of that for me. And Highland Businesswomen struck me as a really lovely organisation, run by a great group of women. And actually, I think it was only my second or third event where they made an announcement that they were looking for board members. And I was like, oh, I can't bring network, but I can bring marketing skills, and I can bring passion and enthusiasm and willingness to try to the board. And so I just went to them and said, I'm potentially interested in the board, and I joined the board. And I sat on the board until I moved back down to the Central Belt, and it was absolutely brilliant. And through the pandemic, because I was furloughed from my day job, through the pandemic I really came to the fore in Highland Businesswomen, did lots of virtual events, built some incredible relationships with some absolutely brilliant businesswomen in the Highlands who maybe felt isolated or who just wanted to speak to somebody other than their husband or somebody other than their kids, or they want a bit
professional still.
But actually those relationships endure. Those people remain my champions in the market here, even though I'm not living in Inverness.
What sort of effect do you think COVID had on property, construction, that side of things?
I mean, I watched before my eyes sites close, people panic in construction. GLM had a huge impact of people panicking and therefore pausing everything.
Yeah.
They weren't applying for planning because they were worried how long this was going to last or the financial impact it was going to have on them. They weren't buying property, because the market was effectively closed, so they weren't doing pre-acquisition building surveys, so our building surveyors were sat there. And so I think it did have a big impact on just the flow of the market. And then in the last year, I've been renovating my own house, and I've seen the massive impact on the cost of materials. Yes. And I think that's going to take us a long time to recover from.
I think a lot of people, particularly listeners to this podcast, sometimes do underestimate the length of the tail on the planning system and just what that can look like, and how many professionals that they have to get involved with the project. And as you say, at the moment, builders are stacked up to the wall, materials are in short supply, professionals are rushed off their feet. So I think although the market is recovering and it's looking fairly good at the moment, I'm not sure it's quite as good as it was last year. Looking at the sort of inquiries that we're getting at the moment, but it's certainly an improving situation. So
and I think it is easy to think that you see your neighbour do an extension and you think they've just started that process and they built their extension, and you're maybe unaware of the fact that they've been in planning and thinking process for a year, 2 years.
Yes.
And you press pause on that process, and then suddenly everyone wants to ramp back up at the same time. Also a challenge in terms of resource for businesses like GLM. But there's still there's still the same process to go through. It's not like you've taken a break on that and therefore. And
I mean, also the other thing, particularly with the planning process at the moment, is the fact that a lot of the local authorities that are involved with this are still, because they're very cautiously returning to work, there's still a lot of remote planning committee meetings. There's still a lot of remote working. I think my neighbour works within planning in the Highlands, and I notice he's still working at home. And I think, at a consumer level, we might feel like COVID's almost gone away and things are almost back to normal, but the reality is that all the other supporting bodies and stakeholders around the process are still desperately overworked, and like you say, it can take months and months and months and months for even the most simplest of projects to get planning consent at the moment. It's crazy. So up until quite recently, you were up here in Inverness, and then you've taken another role. You've shut the door on GLM and moved off to pastures new. So you're now working with Scottish Land and Estates. So talk to me a little bit about them. Who are they? What do they do? And what's your role within the business?
Yeah, so Scottish Land and Estates represents 2,000 landowners, 5.5 million acres of Scottish privately owned land, and we as an organisation the main function of the organisation is a lobbying organisation, represent the interests of rural landowners, helping rural Scotland thrive in Scottish Government and beyond. And so we have a policy team who, each experts in their own field, incredible individuals, way over my head, which is totally fine because I'm not in the policy team. Luckily my job is not a policy officer. So they specialise in all sorts of things, from beavers to rural housing. They've done a lot of stuff recently around the storms, wind blow, just being a voice for rural Scotland in lots of these conversations with the bigger organisations. And then my role is, I'm part of the business team as business development manager. I nurture our existing membership, so both landowners, and we have corporate members who are professionals and trade members. Nurture them to make sure that they want to stay forever and that they get value from their membership, either as a landowner or as a professional member, and to also bring on board new members, again, landowners and trade and professional members. And I think the particular thing for me that I have been able to use is that GLM were professional members and got huge value from the organisation. A great platform for networking, getting your brand out if your target market is rural Scotland.
Well, they certainly seem, from what I can see, they certainly seem like the glue that holds a lot of stakeholders together. And it looks from what I can see, we've recently joined, and it looks like something that's going to be really exciting for us to certainly explore in 2022. So I'm sure our paths will cross again. Hannah, you have been extremely generous with your time today, coming in to have a chat with us. And I've got one final question for you, and that question is, where's the best place to go wild swimming in the Highlands? Because I know you're a bit of a wild swimmer at heart.
Oh, I absolutely love wild swimming, and I'm looking as I'm sat here at your book, Matt, with your name on it, and thinking, I really need to get mine finished. I'm writing a book on wild swimming.
That's awesome. Put me down for a copy.
I will. Best place? Oh, it's so tough. So tough. Oh, I don't actually know if I can choose, but I do love swimming at Doors Beach,
really?
into Loch Ness.
I'm not brave enough for Loch Ness.
Oh, come on, Nessie's not going to eat you. There are much tastier things in the Loch.
We filmed a project down there called the Nessie Hunter, something like that.
I've seen that. Yeah.
It's like an infomercial for Seagate Drives or something. And Steve, what's his face, the Monster Hunter, I can't remember his surname. The director was making him in October. He was in there in just his pants, duck under the waves, and then come out of the waves screaming into the camera. And that put me off ever swimming in Loch Ness ever again. So Doors is up there.
Doors is definitely up there, and I think it's up there because it's such a well-known place. But when you're in the water, you have a different experience of, and I think that's the same for so many of these wild swimming places. I also have magical memories of swimming at Loch Migdale, just outside Bonner Bridge.
Yeah.
Frozen Loch, sunset.
Yeah.
Smash the ice and plunge in is one of my favourite memories of wild swimming.
That's pretty hardcore. Well, I wish you all the best down in sunny Ayrshire. I'm sure our paths are going to cross again soon, Hannah. Thanks a lot for coming in. How can people get in contact with you if they want to reach out to you in your new role at Scottish Land and Estates?
You can find me on Instagram as Hannah Lloyd SLE, or on LinkedIn as Hannah Lloyd, and I'd love to hear from you. Thanks so much for having me.
No problems. I'll speak to you soon. Thanks a lot. And that's it for today, folks. Thanks a lot for listening to the RCR microcast. Remember, if you've ever had any value whatsoever from this podcast, you could do me a massive favour by heading over to wherever you get your podcasts and leaving us a review. Thanks a lot for listening to the show, and I will speak to you on the next one. Cheers, bye.
You've been listening to Ask the ARB. Your host was Matt Harmsworth. To get your planning back on track, the next logical step is to go to www.go-roavr.co.uk right now and get your instant quote today.